Hello, everybody. John Atack and my great friend and colleague, Joe Szimhart. Hi, Joe. And we're going to talk about
John.
cosmists today,
Oh
which I
yeah,
know
we're gonna
I know
go
nothing
into the
about.
cosmos. Yeah,
Yeah.
but you won't believe anything I'm saying.
No,
But
I'll
it's
try
all
not
been
to.
written down. It's in print. It's in stone, and it's
Mm,
been going on for 150 years at
wow.
least.
Without me
Yeah.
noticing.
Yeah, there's a few things I've found out recently that I haven't noticed. I'll bring this up just as an aside. Have you ever heard of this guy named Ed or Ted McKenna? He's kind of like a writer guru that's been
Yeah.
around for a number. I never paid attention to him, but the client brought it up, and so I had to look into him. But
Yeah.
anyway, it relates to some of this because the basis of what I'm going to talk about is this book, The Russian Cosmists, by George M. Young, who's a professor in New England University, specifically the University of New England Center for Global Humanities. And he wrote this in 2012, this book. And the Russian cosmist, the esoteric futurism of Nikolai Fedorov and his followers. So he traces the history of this. Fedorov lived from the earlier 19th century until 1903.
Mm.
So he died in his 70s, I think. He was highly influential. And to this day, he's still influential to people in the current Russian administration, like Alexander Dugin borrowed quite a bit from him, along with
Mm.
Guinan and all this other stuff that he borrowed from in order to Julius Evola and Hermann Wirth and all these things that he developed his own geopolitical philosophy. But Fedorov is the key behind this. Now, Fedorov was known as the Russian Socrates. And the reason for this is he was an autodidact. He was essentially educated. He taught in like what's considered to be a university or colleges, but he would get let go after a year or so at these positions because he was quite a obstinate about his points of view and
Mm.
critical of other people's points of view. Often he was right. Um, he ended up with a job as a librarian at a major library in Moscow, and he developed a following. And these people became like the people that sat around Socrates
Mm.
and talked to him.
In the symposium. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why they call him the Russian Socrates, because he influenced people that later became influential in rocket science, like Vernadsky, but also in the speculative philosophy, like Vernadsky's noosphere came out of Fedorov and other people thinking about this idea that we have to do something about making another layer of human evolution, which is
Mm.
this knowledge sphere above the biosphere called the noosphere. And Teilhard de Chardin spoke about this also.
Mm.
Jung had an inkling of it, and he called it collective unconscious, and that kind of thing. So all this blends together, right? And Jung is in this cosmism stuff that I'm going to talk about. So,
Mm.
so the bottom line here is this, and this is what's kind of shocking when people first understand this. The cosmists, more or less, although they don't all agree with one another, but more or less believe that we will develop a science that will create a noosphere that can actually create spaceship Earth. In other words, we will have the energy to fly Earth around the cosmos and seed advanced human culture around the whole cosmos. We
Okay.
are the source of God intelligence.
Mm.
So Earth will become a spaceship moving. Can you imagine that?
I'd rather
And
not.
and another thing that is mentioned here in Fedorov. Now he doesn't say how this is going to be done. He just says
Mm.
it's got to be done, and he has lots of arguments for this. The other one is that he believed in the resurrection, and he believed in a way where Jesus said, "These things shall," in John 14, these things, or John 12:14, these things shall ye do, and greater things shall ye do,
Mm.
to his apostles. The cosmists take that as meaning that in the development of the sciences, we're going to be able to go into these realms like Buddha talked about, into telepathy and transmigration and all of this stuff that we could do it at will, in other words.
Mm.
And we will be able to collect the space dust that we have become when we died. Like, let's say, Alexander the Great, and we will be able to resurrect Alexander the Great. And that will be the resurrection that Jesus talked about. So we will be able to go back, even back to Adam and Eve, and maybe the snake. I don't know. We can resurrect all that stuff again. And the other thing that's interesting about this is this Eden that they cosmists like to think about, and Dugan, for instance, believes in, that it comes from this idea of Hyperborea, of the northern source, the Nordic source for all of the perennial wisdom, and that then became Atlantis and Lemuria and all that, whatever. Well, they put
the
this,
Aryan people, of course.
The Hungarians also call it Tyrannism, which is, so what Fedorov does, and others, and other cosmists, including Dugan especially, they move this Hyperborea into the Pamir region of what we call Turkestan, that was the original Eden, where Eden was, and that's where we're going to find the remnants of Adam that we can then resurrect.
Wow.
So the Agartha, the Shambhala, the Shangri-La, the Eden of these people is in that area, which is mostly desert now. But at one time it was verdant and full of creatures that could talk to one another and God and all that stuff, and it had the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and of course, here we are. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, crudely put, about what cosmists believe, even to this day. This is some of the stuff that comes out of Putin's dialogue when he had his interaction with what's his name, the former Fox broadcaster, interviewed him for an hour or more. Okay. It doesn't matter. But he didn't understand what Putin was talking about. But this is where this comes from. This is like the Russian soul, the Russian spirit. And this is why they believe Russia will become the third Rome, because they have this secret occult wisdom that was handed down to them specially. So it's going to become the third Rome. It's going to become the geopolitical center of Eurasia. Mm-hmm. And it's going to be in mortal combat with the Atlanticists, the Antichrist, the modernization of the West. And so you see part of the dynamics of Putin invading Ukraine is based on this weird belief system, which is kind of schizoid. The author, Young, calls it schizoid in the book, because it doesn't make any sense. There's a lot of fake knowledge in it. Oh, yeah. And but it motivates this metaphysical idea that Russia is destined, like manifest destiny, to create Eurasia again. Mm-hmm. So for sacrificing all these people, like Stalin did, and it mentions Stalin in this book, Stalin was able to eradicate up to 20 million people through famine and other crazy stuff he did, and shooting them, based on a belief, and Stalin had the same cosmist belief, that they're going to be resurrected anyway. So I am, the ends justifies the means. I'm merely pushing history faster, which we must do. Again, the Russian theme, what is to be done? We must do this and not think about the consequences, because the consequences will work out if we're on the right track. That's the idea of manifest destiny, and, which came from the Christian colonists, for instance. They have the same idea. It's basically the same thing. So what we're dealing with here is really a kind of esoteric fascism, which means this sense of our destiny, this sense of our true identity, of who we are, gives us the right to impose that on other people. Yeah. And that's Cosmism, kind of in a nutshell. Yeah, it's fascinating, because it's why the Russian Orthodox Church is elevated so highly since the downfall of the Soviet Empire, as being the tradition, according to Guénon and others, part of the traditional perennial wisdom of the Russian soul, and it has to be protected. And therefore, even though there's other occult movements in Russia, like the Agni Yoga Society, for instance, was raised up as something special, that was founded by Nicholas Roerich and Helena Roerich in the 20s. The Gorbachevs held it up as special, but Gorbachev has been, denounced. Stalin has been raised up again since the fall of the empire, mainly because Gorbachev was kind of an Atlanticist. He kind of favored democracy a little bit and whatever. He wasn't a true Russian in his soul as Dugin is and as Putin is. So that aspect of Russian conservatism now has this cosmism, what I call cosmic narcissism. In other words, I am the cosmos is me. I am God and God is me. It goes back to the occult dictum, as above, so below, which every astrologer uses and every tarot card reader uses and every cosmist uses. We have found what is above. We have broken through the cave of shadows and reached the Platonic ideal. And now we're going to seize the light like Prometheus, and we're going to bring it down here, and we're going to share it with the world. And if they don't like it, we're going to force it down their goddamn throats, which is what's happening in Ukraine right now. So that's more or less what I got out of this cosmism. And you can kind of see this in the I Am movement that I followed for a while, that, we're going to ram this down the throats by decreeing it into existence. They were using words, not guns, but they were only one step away from using guns. And the same way, I think with Scientology, the same idea is by using some kind of pseudo-psychological mechanism of enlightenment and getting rid of engrams and BTs and what Freud would have called, the mess that the id causes. If we continue to do that, we'll become perfect human beings and resurrect in a way. In fact, Scientology is looking for the resurrection of L. Ron Hubbard in a sense. They keep rooms for him available. So in a sense, Scientology is a cosmist religion in that way. It's interesting, isn't it?
I decorated one of those rooms.
Well, good for you.
Back in
maybe in about 200 years, you'll show up in one of those rooms.
Yeah, I was back, but just to make that point, every Scientology organization has to have an office for L. Ron Hubbard.
Okay.
So as I say, I was in charge of renovating. I was never a staff member in Scientology, but I was in charge of renovating their huge building on Deansgate in Manchester back in 79, 80, somewhere around there.
Interesting.
And we had to, have this room, this completely useless room and every day a fresh glass of water is put in with saran wrap, cling film over the top of it, and all of this stuff. I think you had to have a pack of cool cigarettes. I don't know how often they were updated, but of course the Commodore smoked 5 packets of cigarettes a day and founded Narconon, a drug rehab where you could get addicts off, but not him. Yeah, this is fascinating. I mean, I read one of Dugin's books, and it's Alexander Dugin, who has been an advisor to Putin, and they talk about neo-traditionalism, this return to, and it is a return. It's a going back to a supposed golden age, which is a commonplace for so many groups that they make up a fantasy of the past and say.
But one thing's clear here in this book. It's not only going back and retrieving this perennial wisdom, but it's also recreating it. In other words, there's a resurrection, but it's not happening because we've fallen and we haven't incorporated it into being or spoken it into being, as the New Thought people would say. So that's a big part of this, which is fascinating to me. I was thinking it was more the traditionalism of Guénon, which is a big part of Dugin. They believe Julius Evola and Guénon are the two main traditionalist minds behind Dugin's and that philosophy. But this cosmism predates it to some extent with Fedorov. And so Fedorov and also Vernadsky after him, uh, who believe that we will go and conquer outer space, conquer Mars, conquer the planets, and maybe even create spaceship Earth and fly the Earth around.
Mm.
This is all part of that 19th century dreamscape, like Jules Verne had, and
Yeah, Madame Blavatsky.
Blavatsky tapped into it quite a bit. I think she was more of a second-rate scholar, but very much charismatic in the sense of attracting a hell of a lot of attention, even if it was negative. More so than the other occultists around her, and so but she is kind of accepted and rejected. The Dugan people dislike Blavatsky, much like
Mm.
Guinan did, calling her part of the pseudo initiation. In other words, it's not the real one
Mm.
that I'm presenting. You
Mm.
know, that
Absolutely.
she set up a kind of and like he would criticize Guinan would criticize a lot of the Masonic groups that have speculative masonry um, as being pseudo initiations, even though they're from that original perennial wisdom, they've fallen and they have to be revived. And he said the same thing about the Catholic Church, that it has the tradition in it, but it's been sublimated and they lost it and it has to be recreated. So all of this weirdness drives not only individuals into more weirdness, but entire nations into war.
Mm.
And that's where this whole thing gets dangerous, I think.
Absolutely. I mean, my focus for some time has been um, the notion that absurd beliefs can lead to atrocious behaviors, which is
Yeah.
wrongly attributed to Voltaire. He did say something very elaborate that you might be able to drag that out of, but Radhakrishnan, the second premier of India, actually said it. Absurd beliefs can lead to atrocious behaviors. And for me, that it's a fundamental principle when we look at these groups. Somebody comes along and they have a revelation of some kind, and they see the past and they see the future. And they then tell people, Earth's going to be a spaceship. Of course, relativity theory would kind of go against that idea, I'm afraid. But it's a nice idea. It's a sort of science fiction idea, science fantasy, in fact, idea. It's not
Mhm.
science fiction because it's not scientifically possible. The idea of the Third Rome, which of course is the beginning of the Russian Empire, when Constantinople falls in 1453. That
Mhm.
Constantinople was the second Rome, and you then
Right.
have this belief among the um, Russian aristocracy and nobility that they have now taken on the mantle of Rome, and they are to be the leaders of civilization. And they create this really strange society. With looking at Dugin, it's like with the Make America Great Again. My first question when I first heard that many years ago, I mean, Trump trademarked it in 2006, I think. But Make America Great Again, the first question is, and when was it great? When is the particular moment you're thinking of? I
Mhm.
think America's great now. But are you think and we've actually finally found out last week, Donald Trump said it's the Gilded Age. It's the 1890s. That's when America
Yes.
was great. Looking at Dugin, he's pretty much saying that Ivan the Terrible, as we call him, Ivan the Awesome, as the
Mhm.
Russians call them, that is the point that the neo-traditionalists wish to return to. And you kind of go, it's like with the Nazis and Aryan race theory, that the Nazis, neo-Nazis these days, you won't meet one who's got any idea where the Aryan race theory comes from. Um,
No,
I was talking to somebody
no,
the
it's
other
it's
week.
it's basically new, but
It's
I mean it's been
renewable.
reformulated many times.
Yeah,
But the current formulation is about 100 years, 150 years old.
yeah. And with, the Blavatsky, Ariosophist, Tool Society, Nazi Party,
Right.
Aryan race theory, I was talking to a guy last week, week before, and who was talking about a couple where the husband is of American stock and heritage, and his wife um, left Soviet Russia And he's insistent that his wife is Aryan. And you're kind of going, well, I'm afraid Hitler wouldn't have agreed with you, nor would Himmler.
Right.
Himmler, in fact, said with Barbarossa, the invasion of Russia, that the Waffen-SS were to kill 30 million people, 30 million Eastern Europeans, so they could be replaced. This is the original replacement theory, folks.
Right.
And they did, in fact, kill more than 20 million and possibly as many as 28 million in that. So,
You know what's interesting here about Dugan, and I want to bring this up, and it comes out more in this article, which is about 100 pages long.
mm,
This paper, and I'll put it up here, called "The Mysteries of Eurasia," and it's written by a number of scholars, but Jaffe Arnold is the main author. It was supervised by Wouter Hanegraaff and Dr. Marco Pazzi and Professor Mark Sedgwick and others. That if you read this kind of literature, these are like the top ones. So, The Mysteries of Eurasia, the esoteric sources of Alexander Dugin and the Uzinski Circle, shows very clearly that Dugin tried to reformulate Ariosophy
mm,
and 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 claimed that there was a mistake in creating a racism that was crudely adopted by Himmler out of Hermann Wirth's ideas,
yep.
and and that was a mistake. But the idea behind Ariosophy, its cosmism, its occult truth, is still valid,
mm.
according to Dugin. And so he kind of, with a lot of
And
language.
let's interject for those
Yeah.
who've not read quite as much as you have, Joe. The Ariosophists are a movement that come up at the very beginning of the 20th century in Austria, and
Mhm.
there are two strands. You have a Wotanist strand, which is
Right.
people who are worshipping the supposed Viking gods, Odinists, Wotanists, and you have a Christian strand,
Right.
or pseudo-Christian strand, and this group, they basically come out of the pan-German movement in Austria, where you have this sundering of the various groups. So the Czechs form one group, the Magyars, Hungarians, such as yourself, form another group, the Pan-Slavs, Slavic peoples, form another group, and the
Right.
Pan-Germans, who are in fact the dominant group in the Austro-Hungarian Empire. They had nothing to worry about. The idea was that if you spoke German, you belonged to this race, to this people, which is, genetically we know that's absolute nonsense now. It's demonstrable. But
Right.
so Ariosophy is a group. They would claim that Hitler, when in Vienna as a starving young man before the First World War, would be given free copies of their magazine, and that this would influence him in some way. But the Ariosophists are massively influential in the German-speaking world, and out of
Right.
them comes the Germanen Orden, which is a secret society practicing ritual magic. And out
Mhm.
of them, their front group, if you like, is the Tool Gesellschaft, the Tool
Yeah, that's all
Society.
covered in this paper, by the way. Everything you're
Yeah,
saying is covered in here.
yeah.
So Ariosophy is a complex term. It's a
Let me
cliche,
let me
basically.
let me just finish that thought,
Yeah,
Joe,
oh, wait, go ahead.
because
Yeah, I don't
I
want
think it's
to.
important, because our viewers are not going to be reading that paper right now immediately,
Yeah.
to say that out of the Tool Gesellschaft, they were the founders of the Nazi Party. They recruited Hitler. So there's this direct link from Ariosophy into the concept of the Übermensch
Mhm.
and Nazi race theory. And what we're seeing is the Russian version of that. Somebody
Yeah.
that they're approving of this bizarre set of ideas. And my point is that the current believers and fanatics who are doing terrible things in the world have no idea what they really believe. They don't know the
Yeah.
origins of their belief, and the beliefs that Putin and Dugin and people at the top will have, who are manipulating them towards a peasant society where there will be
Right.
serfs and nobles, and this kind of late medieval society is
Yeah,
their goal.
the whole neo-pagan movement, which doesn't understand this, is based on this crazy idea.
Yeah,
The people that claim to be neo-Vikings and neo-Native Americans and neo whatever, it is based on this crazy idea that all that can be retrieved in some way, and we have to
yeah.
go back to that in order to survive. Um, it's basically bait and switch.
Mm.
The believer comes in, they feel exceptional and they feel special, and they go to war, and meanwhile the oligarchs gather the proceeds.
Yeah.
So
And
Yeah.
you have the belief among the Nazis, and this is an essential belief, that the individual does not matter. It is the racial
No,
soul that
it's
is
collective.
important. Yeah.
It's collective. You're
And
right.
you have to be willing to sacrifice yourself to that. And seeing that, we're gonna
You know,
you're cannon fodder, basically.
but this is where like somebody like Carl Jung falls into this traditionalist trap also,
Oh,
with
and
this
how?
weird idea of the collective unconscious, if there is such a thing. The Akashic record, is another way to look at it, or the noosphere.
Mm.
So we have these ideas being played around with by our people in the tech industry that like to think of themselves as intellectuals, like Thiel and those
Mm.
characters, and
The South
it's
African
it's
collective
being slowly
unconscious.
filtered in through the social media to the general crowd
Mm.
in different ways.
Well,
You
I
know,
mean, we've seen this absolutely bizarre thing in the last few weeks where Elon Musk has offered $100 million to the UK Reform Party, which is our ultra right wing party led by Nigel Farage. That is about 5 times the amount of the campaign funds for any of our major political parties. 100 million.
mhm.
Then he said, I want to get rid of Farage. He's no good. I want Tommy Robinson. Tommy Robinson is in prison at the moment, and he's not in
Oh,
prison
nice.
for the reasons that Elon Musk thinks. It's got nothing to do with him protesting pimping gangs who are recruiting
Mhm.
13-year-olds. It's got nothing at all to do with that. It's got to do with the an attack upon a vicious, vitriolic attack upon a young Syrian boy who was a refugee. Um, and absolutely hateful man. He's got a whole string of convictions for things he's done. He is a thug. He is a hoodlum. And we have Elon Musk, who is not a British national, saying, I'm going to fund him to become the leader in the UK. And you go, this is like having, this is like having a Nazi in charge. And you're getting
Well, even if we get rid of the word Nazi, it's really
a
an autocrat.
fascist,
It's an
a fascist.
autocrat,
Yeah.
fascist, or whatever, but it's definitely a form of totalitarian autocracy,
Mm.
is what he's trying to hand down here.
Yeah.
Kind of a rule by fiat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And all based upon fairy tales that these pseudo intellectuals have really not traced to their origin and really
Well,
not
that's kind of
understood.
why I brought this up. This Cosmism is another fairy tale that's been
Mm.
invented. And when you look at these papers written on it, and thank God for these scholars, because I certainly don't have time to look at this stuff, and nor the linguistic ability, because they're reading it in other languages like
Mm.
Russian and German and Runic or whatever, and they're picking up this stuff and filtering it for people like us. And I think this part of the academy is really the crux of our salvation, because they're trying to do this in a legitimately journalistic and academic way where they double check facts and keep adjusting, much like science does, correcting
Mm.
each other with their papers. And this drives conservatives nuts, the right wing nuts, because they don't like change like that. They don't want to, they want to keep things in like the four square gospel, keep it
Yeah.
in a corral, don't let anything out,
Mm.
and then people will be happier. And the truth is there.
Mm.
This is how, and that's very inviting for people that live in a very complex world that's getting more and more complex in many ways, to dumb everything down and make it a lot simpler. I mean, this is the basis, the capitalist venture of Fox News, is to dumb down reality so people feel better about listening to the news, and they do, and they buy into it. So yeah, there we are. We have that kind of a world right now.
Yeah, it's the enforcement of ignorance. Uh, um, I saw somebody commenting on it's a guy who goes out and gets Vox Pops, and he was saying we're not going to talk about the rise of anti-Semitism because when did it ever go away? When did it ever
Yeah.
diminish? And looking at populism and belief, I've spent since August, I've been delving into the Nazi beliefs, how they relate to theosophy. Madame Blavatsky would most certainly not have been a Nazi, from what I read.
Oh no.
Quite
No.
the opposite.
She would have been a radical. Today, she would have been a radical feminist.
Yeah, she was a socialist. Um,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. And
she,
she was basically a Buddhist, at the end of her life. I
yeah,
mean, I wouldn't,
yeah,
but she was initiated into a sect of Buddhism, and
she she,
she wrote
she
her
was,
book, The Voice of the Silence, based on Buddhist ideas. I'm not saying it's great, but
yeah,
even some scholars say it fairly well represents Buddhism as she knew
it represents Mahayana, yes.
it. Mahayana Buddhism, correct,
Yeah.
which was the more popular form of it.
Yeah, I personally don't regard Mahayana as a form of Buddhism, but that's just me, because it fundamentally disagrees with the Buddha. The Buddha said, "You must leave this world as a man leaves a house burning down."
Right,
Whereas
right,
Mahayana, 1,000 years after the Buddha, a monk meditates, goes back and finds a sutra, the flower garland, which nobody had recorded. Ananda was the one he didn't remember.
mm.
And
Oh
so
yeah,
1,000 years later, he writes it down, having gone back there. And it basically says, we are the large vehicle, the Mahayana, as opposed to the Hinayana, the small vehicle. We have to take everyone with us. So the bodhisattvic vow comes into being. I
right.
will refuse enlightenment until even the grass and the trees are enlightened. So it's anti-Buddhism. The Buddha said, you've got to get
Mm.
out. And they're saying, we've got to take everyone with us. Um, I'm not
Yeah, so
saying
in
that
other words,
either is right or either is wrong, but they're not the
right,
same
but
thing.
I think you are saying is that Buddhism turned into Cosmism.
Yeah.
Again, we have to save the collective. We have to stick
Mm.
around. We have to create the collective, and we can't leave existence until we perfect it.
Yeah.
That's basically what they're saying. Where, if you look at the conflict that Cosmism brings up between the New Testament God, which they claim to follow, the idea of resurrection, and the Pharisaic view of Judaism, which was resurrection. But when you look back into the Older Testament version, it doesn't have any of that stuff in it.
No,
You know, it, it
resurrection comes around with Alexander the
yeah,
Great in the third century, going into Israel and
right.
Judea, and before that, the idea was that when you died, you would be a shadow, a shade, walking in the abyss below the earth, which is the
Hmm.
Babylonian view that had carried on into primitive Judaism, and
Yeah.
that could take us off
So,
into
so
another
I
place
guess
as to
what we're
when Judaism actually emerged, but we won't talk about that today.
well, all religions develop from the founder into other things, and
Mm.
we know this is just normal human behavior to do that. But you're right. I think that there's a reinvention of this, and you have to ask why. What's the reason for it? Is it for the betterment of the culture, or is it for your culture being able to dominate other cultures?
Yeah, and is it because the people doing this are narcissistic and
Yeah.
believe themselves to be gods? They're authoritarians,
Hmm.
who believe that they have the divine right of kings,
Hmm.
to rule over other people, and that is the tension in our society between some attempt to get democracy, and as Churchill said, it's a terrible system, but it's better than any of the others we've come up with. But
Right.
some attempt to get to a real democracy where people actually do have a say in affairs, or to say no, um, only our group have the true wisdom, and everybody else must submit to us. And that tension. Let me read you something. I've been reading this amazing book. You've probably read it because you've read everything. But there we are. Religion and the Decline of Magic by Professor Keith Thomas, who was an Oxford
I have
professor.
not read
It's
that.
phenomenal. I've never
Oh,
read
okay.
it's beautifully written. It was published in 1971. But he starts with something which I think speaks to our issue, 1971, which is this thought that we've somehow progressed, that there's been this intellectual revolution, the Enlightenment or what have you, and now we're all clever and sensible. And which I think it's twas ever thus, we're just the same. Um, he says astrology, witchcraft, magical healing, divination, ancient prophecies, ghosts, and fairies, and now all rightly disdained by intelligent persons. It's not true. They
No.
are not disdained. And we now have a political system where we have people who are completely uneducated or have been educated in completely the wrong things. I mean, we had Boris Johnson, who was educated in classics. He could speak Greek and Latin, but when it came to balancing a budget, or getting us out of the EU, which was a dreadful mistake. So we have people who are fantasists, who've got some simplistic view of the world that they now wish to impose on everybody, and everything will be fine just as long as we all do as we're told and fit in our places. And it's positively medieval, you know, which is with the Cosmists. It's a kind of elaboration of, so we're going to go back to 4004 BC, when, according to Bishop Ussher, God created the world, and we're going to resurrect Adam. What we're going to do about what we've learned about the 13.8 billion year old universe is not going to be part of this. So it's really fascinating that rocket science should have come out of the Cosmists.
It did.
Yeah. In the same way, it also came out of the Nazis with Werner von Braun.
But
we don't talk about.
John, I think this is normal human function. You know, we
oh yes,
continue to.
It would be nice to evolve, though, wouldn't it? You know.
Yeah, this as above below thing. You know, we still wonder what's behind the veil.
Yeah.
You know, is there the veil of death and the veil of birth? You know, we're sandwiched into this exciting life, for better or for worse, and that continues to bother even the greatest scientists.
Of course.
You know, for instance, Josephson took up the TM cult practice, because it relieved his anxiety, which was a good thing. You know, just like benzodiazepines, a good thing for people that suffer from a lot of anxiety, but it doesn't mean everybody has to take it. You know, where TM was sold as like good for everybody. Well, it isn't good for everybody. You know, and neither are benzos. So,
no, well, benzos are probably not good for anybody. The recent research is showing they will affect glial cells in the brain, so that the brain is not being properly cleaned out. So if you are taking any of the benzodiazepines, it's a good idea to have a day or two here and there where you don't take them. And the same's true with Zolpidem, Ambien, these kind of things.
Well, you got to be careful with all of them. And I know this from working in a hospital. You can't just stop taking them, because you can go into seizure. You have to wean yourself from
exactly. But you have to, I think, having, you know, lowering the dose and not becoming dependent upon them. I mean, we have Vivian Stanshall, who was a founder of the Bonzo Dog Doodah band and a great genius. He met Frank Zappa one day and he said, "Oh, Frank, what has it been? It's 3 years since we last saw each other." And Zappa said, "It's like 25 years or something." And this is because Stansfield had been in a benzodiazepine trance for all of that time. So it's a drug to be carefully used. And as you say, it can be useful if you can't sleep, though there are people questioning its use the use at all of sleeping medications. It can be useful if you have anxiety. But it is taking you into the Imaginarium. Let's think about that. This imaginary place. You know, Immanuel Kant, who I'm never going to be clever enough to read, apparently said that there is the real world outside, the real universe, but we each of us live in our interpretation of the universe, and that is wisdom indeed. And what's happened is, in Silicon Valley, this idea of the singularity, that one day God will manifest. This is a teleological process. God will manifest when all the computers and all of the dishwashers and washing machines in the world come together as one thing, and they will look after us, you know, all watched over by machines of loving grace, as Richard Brautigan put it. And God will have come into being, and we just sit back and it'll do everything. And you go, there's the Terminator, you know.
There you go. Let me add something. You just reminded me of something in Cosmism. Some of the Cosmists came up with this idea based on Fedorov's futuristic view of mankind, that we will not need all that stuff. At some point, we're going to create ourselves to become more like plants, humanoid-looking plants that get our energy directly from the sun. We will not have to have sex anymore, because we can
I'm definitely going off
we
this
can
idea.
recreate. We can recreate
No.
without. We can recreate humans without that in some energy transference. This is something that was taught in Church Universal and Triumphant when I was there. That was their idea, that sex would diminish and the human body would become angelic and form dyads, and then new angels can form out of the dyads in a way. And this is what the Cosmists believe we're also creating, not just the resurrection, but also this kind of almost like an ET, you know, this weird looking human that lives off of energy. It doesn't need to eat, doesn't need to kill animals. it doesn't, it will absorb energy directly from the universe.
Which is the first root race of Madame Blavatsky.
Exactly. We're going back to that. Yeah.
And it's the objective of Himmler, the Lebensborn, that because the Aryans miscegenated, had sex with other kinds of creatures, which is somebody criticized me in the comments for saying that the Aryans had sex with orangutans. He said it doesn't say that anywhere in the Secret Doctrine, and it bothered me for 3 days until I found the passage where she talks about the red-haired creatures that they'd and I did say orangutans is me saying they're the only red-haired humanoid type things I can think of. But this idea that these incredibly stupid people had sex with apes and created the modern German Aryans, and the idea with the Lebensborn is, as you know, and there were between 8 and 20,000 children born Lebensborn. Frida in ABBA was a Lebensborn child, whose mother, I think, moved from Norway to Sweden to bring her up because of the prejudice of the Norwegians against Lebensborn children, which they've paid compensation out for now. But the idea was that, and Himmler was absolutely obsessed with this, that you could breed super beings who would have what he called electron powers. They'd be able to fire electricity from the ends of their fingers. Fairy tales, just fairy tales.
Well, the author of Harry Potter picked up on that, and instead of fingertips, it's little wands that send the energy all over the place, like Mesmer with his wand.
Yeah,
we still
animal magnetism.
I just noticed that there's a new Superman movie coming out again, where we can, you can fly. This is like this power, this cosmist power is like we're obsessed with it in a sense. It makes great movies. People sit there and watch and salivate over this kind of power.
Yeah, and it's just a reframing of the stories that have been told around the fireside for tens of thousands of years. So, looking at the belief that witches could sit on broomsticks and fly, that to have these superpowers, it's there throughout human history. But rather than recognizing it as a story for children, it's become a religious belief. It's become, a passionate and fervent belief.
What's interesting about the Cosmists and the drive behind Putin and Eurasianism and all this is partly this idea of that it will lead to the future of the superhuman.
Yeah.
It's kind of Nietzsche influencing this whole thing too, of his Ubermensch. We and to me it goes back to the ancient Gnostics that wanted to reject the world as it is because it's fallen, it's a false creation, it's a Maya, it's an illusion. And once we realize that, deeply know it, or grok it, as Heinlein said, when we have that inner knowing, we will then escape from this by knowing what we know. And in fact, some of the Gnostics believed that once you knew that, you could practice the Endora, meaning you could fast from water and food until you died and went back into the pleroma because it was a holy act. So suicide became a holy act.
As it is among the Jains to this day.
Yeah. So humans have had this instinct, or whatever you want to call it, to end this misery in one way or another. We either end it through drugs or going to ayahuasca retreats, or by getting as much stuff and toys as we can to distract us. It goes on, and we end up satisfying or overly satiating our appetites, whether it's food or sex, or even, like with me, reading books, to get away from stuff. But hopefully my reading is of a quality which is enriching. That's what I'm hoping.
Yeah, I mean, Schopenhauer, who he wrote a beautiful tract on happiness, and you're going, Schopenhauer? And he said,
pessimist, the ultimate pessimist.
Yeah, I have proved that human life is miserable. Now let me tell you how to be happy.
Okay.
And you can actually boil it down to there is the life of the mind. That
Hmm.
we live in the world. We have to live in the world, and I don't have too much problem with that. I think the world is absolutely beautiful and wonderful, as long as it doesn't bite me. Um, but we also have this potential to live within our thoughts,
Hmm.
and for many of us, that means playing video games or watching television or meditating. These various ways of having the life of the mind. But for others of us, it does mean extending what we think, and
Hmm.
and so becoming fascinated, and immunizing ourselves against pain, to some extent, by exploring the world of ideas. And we see people becoming lost in that, where the idea becomes an addiction. um, I've often used ideas of being enchanted or spellbound, as
Hmm.
saying this is just another way of saying brainwashed. That it's just that this idea has always been there, that there are people who can uh, force their intentions upon you. I mean, the center of Scientology, when I discovered, not long after I'd left Scientology, I discovered that Hubbard had been a devotee of the teachings of Aleister Crowley. And I've, that's absolutely proven. I've written about it 30, 35 years since. Um, and to then go, well, what were we being taught in Scientology? This is just, in fact, a rebranding or a reframing of these same
Hmm.
ideas. So, what the magician is doing to seek in traditional ritual magic is to capture elemental spirits, discarnate spirits, and to use them to carry intentions, the will, thelema, to make things happen to other people without their knowledge, without
In
their
other words,
consent.
and their fingerprints aren't on it. It's the spirit that's doing it.
Yeah, and this is fundamental to magic. And then you go to Hubbard, and it's all about control of other people, whether they
Hmm.
like it or not. He calls it 8C, or infinite control. He calls it tone 40. Um, and it's about intention. Intention is the center of the system. And you're going, oh, that's the same. That's Thelema in Crowley's system, that you're going to be able to impose your will on others, the left hand path, the sinister path, the path of magic, the path of power. And it's, I was shocked. I was shocked to find that, because I don't consider myself a practitioner of the left hand path, and I never have. I believe that we should be compassionate and caring towards other people, that we should not manipulate other people, that we should explain what we're doing along the way rather than just forcing people to do things, which is the path of mysticism, the right hand path. And so to find that I'd been it for 9 years, I've been a practitioner of a left hand path where we were trying to make ourselves into gods. And this,
Hmm.
and you look at it, you look at how pathetic it is that these people. I had a situation that there was a time when Ronald Reagan and George Bush Sr. both had psychics. One of them was called Judy Heavenly, and the other was called Priscilla Astral. And I think it was Judy Heavenly I met, and a friend of mine just brought it to my house.
Oh.
We were working on a documentary, and he is just one of his friends. And she could predict the future. Imagine that. Isn't that incredible? She said that my then wife would become a successful writer of children's literature. And she's now 67 and she's not written anything yet. But, she's still
Sure.
alive, so it could happen. But we were walking back to the railway station, and there's a road with some quite fast traffic on it. And we'd walked past the crossing, the little green man crossing, and we were, because that was my usual thing. And she got scared and wanted to walk back to the crossing to cross the road. And I said, there'll be a break in the traffic within the next 2 minutes. And there was. And I didn't understand. It was only later that I went, oh no, she's predicting the fate of nations. And she doesn't
Uh,
even know this simple thing. And that, we are in that place where we've got all of these fakers who are,
mhm.
manufacturing this nonsense and decide that they are entitled to harm other people because Yeah, we'll all be resurrected one day. All of our cosmic dust will come back together. And you mentioned Heinlein, and that's very interesting. Stranger in a
Hmm.
Strange Land, of course, Valentine Michael, a central character, evaporates people. You can just
Sure.
evaporate them because they'll reincarnate. Central idea of Scientology. And of course, Ron Hubbard was Heinlein's
Mhm.
closest friend. So
Yeah.
close, in fact, that they, according to Heinlein's diaries, they had sex together, which is very close.
Well, it's
Um,
all part of the tantric mystery, and we
of course
sometimes
it
fall
is.
into the wrong end, so.
Yes. Yes. That's what it is. Oh dear.
So anyway, are we running out of time here? Because I don't
I
know
think
how.
we must be coming close to running out of time,
Yeah,
and,
we could
and that
wrap
will
this
be
up.
the end of end days. We'll come to it. And let's just add one other package of ideas that has profoundly influenced humanity, perhaps more than any other package of ideas, and that's the Book of Revelation. We're not going to talk about it today, but if you look at the creation of Israel, for example, or the Iraq wars, there is a lot that's to do with an interpretation of the Book of Revelation and the idea that Jesus will come back. So the Zionist movement, and we'll finish on this perhaps, wasn't started by Jews. The Zionism among Jews is a movement of the 1880s. You know,
Mhm.
Zionism had existed since 1620 when English Puritans went, oh, Revelation says that until the Jews go back to Zion, to Jerusalem, and convert to Christianity, Jesus won't come back. And that
Mhm.
drive has gone through history. It's still happening now. That we've got President Trump has announced that he's going to give aid to Israel and Egypt. You're going,
Sure.
why?
Yeah, we're
Why
victims of
particularly?
the theater of occultism in a way.
Yes, very well
We
said.
are, and we don't know
Yeah,
it. And
yeah.
I think of Shakespeare's The Tempest, where
Mm,
Shakespeare clearly creates a magical world
mm,
from the stage or on the stage in the minds of the audience.
mm.
But at the end, he breaks the fourth wall, the Prospero,
Yeah.
takes the costume off, and says the play is over and the magic is gone.
Mm.
Go home.
Yes.
So it's kind of like Dorothy Gale, the Wizard of Oz,
Mm,
after the magic is over and the wizard is exposed, the wizard becomes a dream and she goes home.
mm.
So
Back to Kansas, Dorothy.
we have a hard time coming home,
Mm,
I think, is what the problem is. And, some people, like my mother, God bless her, at the end of her life, I saw her being home in her mid 90s until she died at age 100.
mm,
She was done with this world.
mm,
Her home was in eternity, whatever that meant to her. And she was ready to click the ruby
mm,
shoes,
mm,
and I watched this process, this woman, still very beholden to Catholicism, taking
mm,
the communion host when the person would come, respecting the religion, but not buying it. She kept saying it's just made up by man.
mm,
This is a woman who never read a book on theology that I saw coming up with brilliant self-composure
mm,
and an ability to just kind of get ready for
mm.
that final transition with ultimate grace is the way I saw it. I mean, there was a struggle at the end because her mind was going in the last few months, but but still, just seeing that realization in someone that is never become going to become a famous guru became a guru to me in a way, just
Yeah,
by helping,
I
you
had
know.
the same experience with my mother that
Yeah.
um, she she was a youngster compared to your mum. She was 94, only 94 when she died. And I had the privilege of looking after her really for the last 17 years of her life. But the last five were fairly difficult because four of her vertebrae collapsed.
Oh yeah.
So she was in pain. But Montaigne, there's a wonderful essay on death by Montaigne where he says, as a young man, I couldn't sleep at night because I was so frightened of death. And he said, and now I'm an old man. I think he was about 53 when he died. Now I'm an old man. It's welcome. I'm
Yeah.
not frightened. And I must say that my mum used to say, whenever people she didn't know came to visit, she'd say, "What do you think of euthanasia?" And
Oh
and they'd be, oh, and she'd comedy pause. She'd say, "I think it's a really good idea."
yeah.
And she was, she didn't want to reincarnate. She didn't want to go to heaven. She said, "I'm done.
Yeah.
It's happened." And I
I
must
think
say that gave me tremendous consolation in life, that
yeah,
I'm
I
not
think
worried
what
about
I
any of these spiritual things, and
right.
I live a happy life. I really do.
Yeah, I think when we you come to these kind of conclusions because we conclude life in a certain way. Even some of us do it well and others don't. But it's that kind of thing. A friend of mine asked me once, the day before he died, an old gallery owner, Bill Tate.
Ah,
And a surprise question. I was leaving for Florida on a case, and I was visiting him at his gallery, and he said, "Joe, what do you think happens when we die?" Never talked about it with me before, and he was going to be dead within 10 hours after he asked me the question. I didn't know that.
no.
And I surprised me, and I said, "Well, I, I, I don't know. Maybe it's another adventure, you know." And we just kind of laughed and let it go. And so I guess I'm still of that attitude is just okay. Well, surprise me, you know.
Mm.
And if there's no
Uh,
surprise, that's okay too.
yeah, I've long been an admirer of Jiang Tzu, the great
Uh-huh.
Chinese philosopher, who simply said, "I don't know where I was before I was born. I don't know where I'll be after I die." And
Yeah.
there you go. That's it solved for me. That
Well, back
and
to the
enjoy
Russian,
it now. Enjoy it now.
yeah,
You know.
back to the Russian cosmists as we started this. This whole movement is based on trying to defeat death,
Yeah.
immortality, creating immortality forever.
Yeah.
I mean, it brings up a lot of stupid questions like, okay, you're resurrected. What body are you going to have? Do you need gonads? Are you going to need the navel? Are you going to need a stomach? Will we be eating? Are you going to need eyes? Because now you can telepathically see everything.
Hey, hey,
You
hang
can,
on. This is a world where there's no chocolate cake, right? I'm not
I don't
liking
know. Well,
this.
it depends what you want to resurrect. You can resurrect chocolate cakes.
Yeah, but if I've got no stomach, what am I going to do with them? You know, no
Anyway,
taste buds. I mean, yeah,
these are just questions. They're irritating questions. I understand that, but they're fun also. All right,
yeah,
John.
yeah.
Any
Uh,
last words?
well, just great, good fun as ever, Joe. It's always
Okay.
an adventure talking with you.
Well, and thanks to Spike for cleaning this up and making it worth watching.
Yes, yes. Thank you very much, Spike. And please don't leave horrid comments about Spike. We've had a guy who said a couple of nasty things about it. It really upsets her. So don't
Oh,
do it.
don't be.
She works hard and she does a very good job. It's been 10 years now this year since she and I started working together.
My word.
And I couldn't have done what I've done, let alone I couldn't have done half of what I've done. I couldn't have done what I've done without her help and support. So there you go. Let's
All
all
right, John.
round of applause for Spike, I think.
All right.
Great. Thank you very much, Joe. We'll
Thank you,
see you
John.
again
Yeah, maybe
over
we'll
the.
talk about something less cosmic next time.
Yeah, let's talk about something mundane next time, like shopping, something
Yeah,
like that.
try. Go ahead and try to do that. Yeah, I don't
It's
think
not.
it's in you.
No, I think you're probably right. I have actually been shopping though, once or
Oh, you
twice.
have.
I admit it.
Yeah.
On the astral plane, obviously. But
Okay. All right,
grand.
John.
Thanks so much, Joe.
I got to run. Bye
Yep.
bye.
Bye bye. Hi, John here. Thanks for watching. We'd appreciate it very much if you would click like, as well as subscribe, and click the bell for notifications. Every dollar helps, and we welcome new patrons on Patreon, or you can make a one-off payment with any currency through PayPal. Thanks so much.